I'd like to invite your attention to Luke chapter 15, beginning with verse 11. Luke chapter 15, verse 11. The King James Version says it this way, and he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me my portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided them among themselves his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered together and took a journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, that he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to some citizens of that country. And he spent time in the fields feeding the swine. And there would be a famine have filled his belly with husks. The swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I'm not going to give this message a title. I'm going to leave that in your hands to do. But the Gospel of St. Luke, the 15th chapter, is defined as the known, the lost and found chapter. It is within this passage there are 3 items that were one time lost and then found or reclaimed. And all these things that were lost concluded with a celebration over its recovery, in order for Jesus to help his disciples to broaden their understanding of his mission and his limited love. He decided to share with them a parable, how his mission was indeed to seek and save that which was lost. He explained this by first teaching the parable, these 3 parables. The very first parable in verse 3 deals with the lost sheep. In this parable, Jesus tells the story of how a shepherd had 100 sheep, and unfortunately, one of the sheep got lost somewhere out in the field. The shepherd made a valuable decision. He decided to leave the 99 and go and look for the one. One may falsely feel that if you have 99, satisfy yourself. Why look for the one that is lost? But the heart of the shepherd that patterns after the heart of God the Father understands that even if one sheep is lost, it brings sadness to the heart of the shepherd. He leaves the 99 and goes to find the one. And when he finds the one, the biblical community rejoice over that which was lost. They even celebrate that which was lost. Then he teaches us a second parable that deals with lost silver in verse 8. And this parable tells us that there was a woman who had 10 silver coins, and unfortunately one became misplaced. She went through much extreme effort to try to find that lost silver. One would falsely assume, since you have 9, satisfy yourself. But she understood that even having 1 out of circulation brings sadness to the heart of the Father. So the Bible declares that she began to turn on the light, began to sweep all around in every corner. She went looking for the one lost silver. Well, upon discovery of the lost silver, the Bible declares that she called together all of the women and began to celebrate and rejoice. Saints, notice the comparison. These 2 lost items, the sheep and the silver. The sheep was lost in the field, lost outside of the house. The silver was lost, unfortunately, lost within the house. Some of us are sitting here like we have a cognitive disconnect with this point of preaching, because it signifies on us two lost individuals. There are those that are lost outside of the church, outside the house, but we have many people that are lost likewise in the house and still lost. Don't you know a lot of people in God's church, they're still lost in the house? They're in the right place, they're doing the right things, but they're still lost. But notice, if you would, the woman found the lost silver inside the house, and she turns on the light, which goes to show that she had dispelled darkness. The reason that there are so many people lost in the church is because the church is covered in darkness. Darkness of ignorance, darkness of biblical illiteracy, darkness of stupidity. She begins to sweep. The process of sweeping was to alienate all type of debris and all type of trash and dirt. The reason she began to sweep, because the church has become a dirty, nasty place. That we accept any and everything, all kind of dirt, all kind of behavior, we allow in God's church. But I heard somebody say, none but the righteous shall see God. None but the pure in heart. But I realize that the church is a dressing up place, but there was not only the lost silver, the lost sheep, but verse 11 says, in regards to the lost thing, there was a lost son. Look what it says in verse 11. There was a man who had two sons. And the Bible declares in verse 12 that the younger son came to the father and said, Father, give me my portion that belongs to me. The young son says, Father, give me my inheritance now. Saints, for the point of preaching, I like to call this young boy Junior. Junior goes to Dad and says, Dad, give me my inheritance. I want it right now. He said it rather dogmatically. He came with a very arrogant attitude and says, give me mine right now. Please understand from a historical concept and perspective that the father was supposed to leave the children an inheritance. But the problem was, in this passage, is the younger son comes and asks for his inheritance before the father was even dead. So in essence, Junior is saying to Daddy, Dad, I wish you were dead. In that you have not died, I want my inheritance. Here, what a strange command. Here, a boy living in his father's house, eating his father's food, covered with his father's covers, under his father's roof, but makes a demand of the old man, give me my portion. Well, I want to first of all look at the road from home before we can look at the road back home. Because there is a road that led Junior away from home. Point number one, the road that leads from home. How about turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, the road that leads from home. Subpoint number one, look at this boy's cocky announcement. He comes and says to his father, give me my portion of goods that fall to me. Give it to me right now. Why is he so cocky in his announcement? Because he felt that the father would require too much of him, and he did not want to be limited by any boundaries of freedoms. He felt that the father would restrict his fun and pleasure. He wanted to be free from parental authority. He no longer wanted to live under the authority of his father. He no longer wanted to abide by the rules and regulations and governing laws of his father. He wanted to live a life of freedom and independency. Saints, please understand that that is the typical of the nature of sin. Sin is the attitude of living independent life from the rules and regulations of God the Father. It is when a person says, I no longer want to live under your rules. I no longer want to adhere to your regulations. I no longer want to live by your governing body. This is the essence of sin. He wanted freedom from parental authority. Secondly, he wanted freedom from personal accountability. Junior wanted to live life his way. He did not want to tell his father to tell him what to do. He wanted to leave home and do his own thing. He wanted to live life in the fast lane. He wanted to be free and unfeathered. Get up when he wanted to get up and go when he wanted to go and come back as he pleased. The Bible declares he left home and went into far country. He went as far and spent his money as far as he could go, away from his father's house, away from his father's supervision. He's in the far country. Look what it says in verse 13. He went to the far country, and there he squandered his property by the life of riotous living. Riotous living, he was living life with no restrictions, living in a reckless life. He was the big baller shot caller, living recklessly from the far country. Some of us are sitting here like we have a cognitive disconnect. So I thought I would just spend a little time to try to help you quickly identify Junior. Junior is you and me. We are Junior. For all of us at some point in some period wanted to experience life for ourselves, wanted to live independently of God. We thought that we could live life outside of his rules, outside of his regulations, outside of what he says. And we went into the far country. Please understand that the far country is not some geographical place, but it is some place spiritually. When you live outside of the laws of God, you're living in the far country. Notice, saints, the road to the far country, this boy had a cocky announcement. But B, he had a condescending abatement. Now, abate means to be brought down. He has gone from a privileged life to a life of poverty. Look what it says in verse 14, that he began to be in want. Whenever you and I distance ourselves from God, we always end up in a place of want. Cocky announcement, condescending abatement, but point C, his corrupt attachments. Look at what it says in verse 15. He attached himself with some citizens of that far country. Now, saints, it's a dangerous thing when you attach yourself to people who are no better off than you are. Preach, Stevenson. I think I will preach. Some of us in here have made the bad decision of attaching ourselves, joining ourselves to people who can't do nothing for us, can't fortify your faith, can't fertilize your faith, can't fire up your faith. But listen, you just go ahead and notice that when you attach to people, sometimes it ends up in a mess. Can I preach? There's some people that needs to give away. Some people are dishonorable discharge from their life. There are some people that you attach yourself to that you need to detach yourself from. If they're not a sail on your boat of life, then they are an anchor on your boat of life. If they're not pushing you forward, they're holding you back. You ought to usher them to the back end of your life and tell them to watch you from afar. If they're not an asset, then they are a liability. Because if they're not helping me move forward, then they're keeping me back. And I don't need anybody to keep me back. I don't need anybody to hold me down. I don't need anybody to keep me down from receiving all what God has attached to me. He attached himself to the wrong crowd. Take inventory of the company that you keep. Look at what happened. This is the road that leads him from home. His cocky announcement, condescending abatement, his corrupt attachment. But saints, look at verse 16. It says, he would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating. Look at his thought process. Here he was once a privileged child whose father has an estate, whose father has servants, and now he's wanted. Saints, it's a dangerous place when you separate yourself from God because it affects your thinking ability. To separate from God, it affects you mentally, physically, and psychologically. Look at Junior. Can you see him in the far country, wasting everything? And now he's in the pig's pen. He goes from the penthouse to the pig's pen. But somebody's saying, what happened? Look what happens in the pig's pen. Says, I'm about to bless you real good. All conversion don't happen in the church. Look at your neighbor real good. I said all conversion doesn't happen in the church. But there's somebody can testify that my conversion didn't happen in the church, but I was converted in the pig's pen. I was in a mess. I was doing some stuff that I'm ashamed to even think about, no less talk about. But I'm glad that God saved me down in the pig's pen, in my mess, in my dirt, in my filth. God reached down, picked me up, snatched me out, fortified my life, transformed me in the pig's pen. Is there anybody that can testify that I met the Lord in the pig's pen? There's a couple of you that can testify. You haven't always been holy. You haven't always been churchy. But you got a pig's pen testimony. I don't know about y'all, but I was in some nasty stuff, some dirty, foul, grimy stuff, some funky stuff. But God delivered me out of the pig's pen. All I'm trying to tell somebody, if you have to reach way down, Jesus will pick you up, brush you off, clean you up, put you up, prop you up, pay you up, establish you up. Great God Almighty. Well, now, let me do a little more teaching here. I don't want you to have an immature shout. Point number 2, how to make it back home. How about turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, how to make it back home? Can I tell you how to make it back home? Because the way Junior made it back home explains how we can get back home. Look at what happened in verse 17. It says, and when he came to himself. The implication of him coming to himself implies one time he wasn't right with himself. But he came to himself. Not in the church, but he came to himself in the pig's pen. Somebody up in here can testify that I came to myself with a bottle of EJ up to my lips. Somebody can testify I came to myself with a bottle of Johnny Walker Red with a joint in one hand, a blunt in the other hand. Oh, good God Almighty. Somebody said I came to myself when I was in the strip club. Say, what, make it rain, make it rain. I better leave that alone. God touched me and said, boy, you're not living right. Somebody said, Pastor, what you know about make it rain, but I'll leave that alone. Y'all tell you. But I was in a mess. Can I give you this point? If you're going to make it back home, subpoint number A, you must have a cognitive adjustment. You got to change the way you think. Success and failure is determined by what lies between the ears. It's how we think. Because your perception will color your reality. That's why it is so important that you have a cognitive adjustment. I may not change what's going on around me, but if I could change how I think. Because as a person thinketh, so are they. You got to change the way you think. You've got to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. There must be a cognitive adjustment in the way you think, because what you believe will dictate how you behave. How you behave will dictate who you become. So if I change who I have become, I got to change how I behave. And if I am going to change how I behave, I got to change what I believe. If you believe you are defeated, you will behave like a defeated person. That's why you have so many youth and children acting a fool, is because nobody told them how great they are. That's why you got to have some parents and some grandparents to speak into their lives and tell them, you're not some fool, but you can learn, you can be something. You got to have a cognitive adjustment. Not only must you have a cognitive adjustment, but points. Look at what it says in 17b. It says this: how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but I'm here dying in hunger? Not only do you need a cognitive adjustment, but here's another subpoint. You need a critical assessment. He started assessing his situation. He says, now, this doesn't make any sense. I'm a son of a father who has it going on, as they say in hip-hop culture. My father has servants and have enough food to spare, and I'm up here dying. He said, this doesn't make any sense. He sits there and have a critical assessment. What I'm telling you is to tell somebody up in here, you have to assess where you are. You must understand that you're not supposed to be living any kind of way because of who you are. You are a royal priesthood. You are a chosen generation. You are a child of God. You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. You are more than a conqueror. The greater one is inside of you. You serve a victorious Savior. Why aren't you living like it? Because your Father owns everything. You are the head, not the tail. You are up, not down. You are in, not out. There must be a critical assessment. Now I got to make it back home, because it's hard for a brother out here. Look what it says in verses 18 and 19. I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like your hired servant and hired hands. Look at what he does, subpoint C. He has a contrite acknowledgement. His heart is broken. He's sorrowful. He's sad. He's convicted. He says, I have sinned. I have a contrite acknowledgement. What I like for you to notice is that he calls his father, Father. He calls his father, Father. Now I know that that's not real deep to my high theological, profound people, but it blessed me, because what it tells me is this: although I have been in the far country, the relationship had not been ruptured. Although there was distance between the father and son, the relationship had not been ruptured. Because distance never changed the reality of the relationship. Although you went into the far country, he is still your father. And you are still his child. and he's not stopped loving you at all. But if you're going to make it back home, you must have a contrite acknowledgement. You must be willing to say, I've sinned. Now here's this, saints. Every choice has a corresponding consequence. If you leave the far country, you got to make a choice to leave. Junior got up and said, I'm going home. Well, let me just toss this out for free. You don't have to pay for this. Whenever you decide to go home, you always got to be willing to leave some things and some people behind. I'm getting up from here in verse 19. He has a desire. But in verse 20, he makes a decision. Because you can have a desire all day long. But if you don't get off of your do nothing and make a decision, all you got is woulda, shoulda, coulda, woulda. Behind every desire must be a decision. Some people become comfortable in the context of their condition. So they become complacent in the context of their condition. That they are conformed to the context of their condition. That's because that becomes life for you. It's like a person now, don't take any offense, who was raised in the projects. And the projects were never designed for 4 and 5 generations to come out of. Preach Stevenson. You can't pass down a project. You need to break that spirit out of our community. We become crippled by a system that wants us to stay codependent. Because if I can condition you to stay codependent, then I can use you as my slave. But you got to learn to say, hell to the no, hell no, hell no. I'm not going to stay complacent. I'm not going to stay comfortable. I'm going to break out. Leave that far country. Is there anybody up in here that can testify, I told hell no? I told the devil no. You're not going to have my joy. You're not going to have my peace. You're not going to have my life. Junior got up and said, I'm going back home to my father's house. Now, could you join me in the theater of my mind? You know, black preachers, we always got a divine imagination. I can see Junior going home. Father sitting on the front porch, reading the Pasadena News, praying, Lord, send my child home. But what Daddy didn't know while he was praying, God was working on Junior's heart. I'm trying to help somebody. If you're praying about your children, keep on praying. Because as you pray, God is working on their hearts for them to come back home. Look at the father. He got up and said, wait a minute. That's my son. Get the best robe. Cover my boy with a robe. Because when he was in the far country, he got dirty, torn, nasty, developed some habits, some issues. But I'm going to cover him. And the father said, bring me a ring. The ring represents sonship. You're not a servant, but you're my son. The father said, bring me some shoes. Because only slaves walk around barefooted. The shoes recognize dignity. And the father said, let's have a party. Because my son was dead, but now he's alive. I just dropped by to tell you, if you want to come back home, the father said, come on home. I'm waiting on you.